Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am so thrilled today to bring you a return guest. Angie Callen was on the podcast before, and we talked a lot about her business and all the things that she was doing. But now she's written a book, and you are going to love it because if you haven't met Angie, you will definitely meet Angie by reading her book. It is called Scary Good, Discovering Life Beyond the Sunday Scaries, a book for the burnt out, the brave, and everyone in between. And I just read it, and I am so excited to talk about it with her and have her share it with you. So welcome to the show, Angie. I'm so thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited that I get to have this conversation with you. And ultimately a book is like the pinnacle of visibility. So it just feels fitting.
Perfect. Exactly. And we were, I was on your show talking about my book and everything. So like we keep bringing good stuff out into the world. So let's start with the simple part here. What does scary good mean to you?
Well, I'll have to backtrack and tell you kind of where the whole name came from, just for a
Okay.
little bit of context. Because I think to understand Scary Good, you've got to know a little bit about the Sunday Scaries piece.
Oh, okay.
And, out in the working world, some people know what Sunday Scaries are, some people don't. But generally speaking, it is the weekend anxiety that most professionals get about the start to the week. And whether you experience it all the time or just sometimes or occasionally, statistically, we are all going to experience it. 36 times a year is the average. Also, by the way, there's only 52 Sundays a year. So, 60% of the time, most people are feeling this anxiety for the start of the week. And so we let Mondays ruin our Sunday. And in my whole quest to encourage people to have thriving careers and businesses and amazing lives, I started a newsletter 4 or 5 years ago called Combating the Sunday Scaries. And it started as a simple, here's 7 tips to improve your work week. And it was things like meal plan and write the 6 things you need to do tomorrow down in advance. And eventually that evolved into Angie talking about the antics of her quirky mountain life. And once I started doing that, readership soared and consistently became very, very high. And so I realized I was onto something about kind of this show what it means to combat the Sunday Scaries versus tell what it is to combat the Sunday Scaries. And eventually all of that came together into this idea of pairing those themes with like my macro level story of how I've gotten to this stage of work-life integration and designing a life that I want. And that's scary good.
I love that so much. And I can tell, I've watched your trajectory, right, of where you started using that and starting to talk about that. And you can see just the interactions and engagement that people have with that because they can totally relate to what you're talking about. Now, I missed one part that I want to go back to before we go much further. I think it'd be helpful if you just share a little bit about your background
Sure.
and what you have done, because that is very clear in the book that it's been an evolution for you, but I think it would be good for people to know that.
It has been an evolution that I would say I never intentionally set out to have, but there was no other way life was going to go. And it is no spoiler because the very first line of the book is, I am a former engineer who loves people. And that alone should tell you that some sort of evolution had to come because there's a reason the word former is in front of engineer. It just was not a career type that was cut out for me and my personality. However, some of, just upbringing, self-limiting beliefs, societal norms caused me to take a little time and go on a journey. And that is a lot of the book to figure out what I wanted that to look like. So it was a lot of rinse, repeat. It was trial and error. And in a way, it was my own exploration into how to not have a mediocre life for me. And in putting the book out there, wanting to help people see that they all can do the same. Because I think that we accept I have to stay stuck, I have to do this thing, we should all over ourselves, instead of looking at this and saying, hey, what do I want to prioritize? What matters to me most? What are my values? And how can I craft a career that supports life instead of living life in the margins, essentially? And that's really what the book chronicles. But at the foundation, I've gone through this from starting my career as an engineer in the early 2000s when it was normal as a kid of a baby boomer to go to college, get a degree, and do that thing for 30 years. Maybe you'll change jobs once, but you're going to do the thing, right? And then so many factors came in and started shaking things up to allow us to work differently, live more intentionally. And I started taking advantage of that, I think, a little earlier than many people my age. A lot of people wait until mid-career, and I did it kind of a quarter of the way through. And a big move to a place that was important to me was a catalyst to that. And from a foundational perspective, a lot of it is just, will this job work? What can I learn from myself in this opportunity that presented itself, and just taking open doors as they came along. And all of that ultimately led to starting my own coaching company 8 years ago. And now that's a portfolio of brands helping people live and work intentionally in various different ways.
Yeah, I love how you described, it's very vivid. The way she describes like sitting in her office, looking out at the mountains, wishing she could be skiing or snowboarding, but she's designing other things that she really doesn't care about at that moment. I think it happens to a lot of people. And much like you had the same similar belief system that you take a role and you stay in it, or you stay in the same company the rest of your life. And I think that is for anybody who's been through that, they understand it, but it's really hard to then walk away from that because it is like ingrained in you that this is the thing you're supposed to do.
And a lot of times, especially in America, it becomes our identity. I mean,
Mhm.
we are one of the few societies who starts every conversation with a new human in, "Hey, what do you do for work?" In other societies and cultures, it's, "What did you eat today?" Right? It is
Mm,
it is, "Did you get your basic human needs met?" Here, "What you do for work so I can size you up and decide whether or not you're in my social economical demographic." Right?
yes.
And I think because of that, it's that the labels tend to overshadow our ability to just be people who have intrinsic motivations, interests, and different priorities from each other. And that's something we definitely lean into in the book, is exploring that idea of what's my identity without any of those things.
Yeah, because it's hard. I know it was hard for me when I walked away from craft. What is my identity now? Because that was my identity for so many years. And I didn't expect that. I wasn't expecting to have to figure out what's my new identity. Of course, I knew it intellectually, but it's kind of ingrained in you too that this is who you are. This is who you've been your entire
Mhm.
life.
Especially when you work for a place that's recognizable. I work for
Hmm.
craft. Oh, what do you do with craft? Oh, I do this cool thing. That is, it's an identity others can understand. So for me, if I would walk into a room and people would say, "What did you do?" And I said, "I'm a civil engineer," and they look at me and they're like, "You're this like 5'1" little girl and you're an engineer." The next question is always, "Where did you go to school?" Which
Mm,
now starts to, layer on the impressiveness,
right.
uh, the perceived impressiveness. And all of a sudden, I start walking into rooms and I don't have that party trick. And then you start exploring, how do I explain to people what I do in a way that they can understand? But ultimately, nothing is, nothing is quite as, "Oh, you do that." With some of these labels that we attach our identity to. But in my opinion, there is a difference between what you do and who you are. And you will have a much fuller life if you know what those two look like, but also know how to construct something that each one complements the other
Hmm.
versus
Yeah.
competing with each other.
And that's a journey just to figure all that out too, which is what I love about your story, just showing all of the ins and outs of how you had to do that for yourself. And of course, there were people that came into play for that, places that you worked, all of those things happened for you. Okay, so let's go back to what does scary good mean to you?
To me, scary good is finding equilibrium in all facets of life. And I use the word equilibrium very intentionally, because we hear a lot in the professional world about work life balance. And that is not a phrase that's in my book on purpose, because it implies this idea that we can get to this steady state of something is balanced. But that ultimately is never really going to be the case. Most professionals are going to have seasons where it's busy, less busy. There's going to be life priorities that come in and take precedence over something at work. If you're in the entrepreneurial space, you know that life is work and work is life, and that's a choice. But they all kind of work together in this equilibrium that is intentional and integrated. And to me, life becomes scary good when you don't think about, "Oh man, I got to go back to work on Monday," or, "Oh, I got to start seeing clients tomorrow morning," or, "Oh, I wish I didn't have to go to work so I could go play and do this thing I want to do." And instead, it becomes this idea of, okay, I'm going to work right now because then I get to do the thing later, because I've designed my life to include all of these things in this intentional way, instead of that mediocrity I mentioned, which is, I just have to go work from 8 to 6. I'm going to go home. I'm going to make dinner. I'm going to put the kids to bed. And then I get to have life in the half an hour that's left before I fall asleep on the couch. That was not anything I ever wanted, but it took a little while to realize that and exactly how I did want the scary good life to look.
I definitely had that for a long time. I think I gave myself an hour, but I definitely felt like that was all I got at the end of the day. So you've been writing this blog, you've been talking to people, you've been out speaking about these topics. Why was it important for you to write a book?
I have been wanting to write a book for 4 or 5 years, and it was important to me. It's interesting, as an author, I think you'll relate to the fact that our relationship with our own stories changes over time. And I've been trying to figure out how I felt like I had a story that could empower, inspire, and show people exactly what my mission is, right? We as humans still matter, and you matter most. And you get one life in this world. And the last thing I want to do is regret not living it on my terms to the fullest with the most impact I could have on others. And I believe that my trajectory to get to that point, and it's never going to be over, was something that can inspire other people to do the same, which is why I wanted to write a book and tell this story of, overcoming challenges and figuring out how to fearlessly tackle life, even if it looks real ugly sometimes. The problem I always had was I couldn't quite figure out the cover for it. And so I had this life story, and like 3, 4 years ago, I hammered out 30,000 words of a life chronology over a weekend, and I was like, "Okay, what the heck am I gonna do with this now?" Because I couldn't really find the thread, and even though I kinda knew what I wanted the book to do, I just was having a hard time pairing it with, an intentional format. And then earlier last summer, it occurred to me that, this past December, just before the book came out, was the 200th edition of the newsletter that has clearly impacted so many. And it was like this Angie, you're a moron smack to the face of this is your medium, right? You have a story, you can pair that with these learnings and teachings that come out in these newsletters. And it just beautifully paired so well together to create an arc of both a narrative and the learnings to arrive at this conclusion of, being really human on purpose in this really fast-paced technology-driven world. And so I feel like I've always wanted to tell the story. Right now became the right time to do it because all the factors came together that showed me it was the right time and the right way.
Hmm. Yeah, and it wouldn't have been the same, right, as if you had done it before. I think there is
Oh,
so
yeah.
much. I love that you talk about your story changes over time because as we look and reflect back, we can see things. Even when I wrote the workbook, there was a story in there about my first boss that I did not even think about until I wrote that part, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm still reflecting even now, and I'm the one putting this together." So I think it happens for all of us when we're ready,
Mhm.
whenever that is. Okay, I want to talk about alignment and purpose. So I'm going to read from her book, and I want you to just comment after. We think doing more will somehow give us peace. But when we try to be everything to everyone else, we end up being nothing to ourselves. Perfection is not sustainable in the long term, nor is control. Neither is a cure for the overwhelming level of responsibility we've placed on ourselves, and none of it will break alignment. Ultimately, all we're doing is disappointing ourselves more than anyone else. I can't think of a worse fate than to think back one day and say, I should have done more for myself. Clarity, confidence, and contentment take us much further in this world than keeping up with the Joneses or living under someone else's definition of success ever will. But doing more will never get us there. Alignment comes from knowing who we are, what we value, and what actually matters to us. Not only do most of us never stop doing long enough to define success for ourselves, even if we do, we set it aside for someone else's checklist. From the pressure to have a social media worthy vacation to the fear of failing, we stay stuck and we stay small. Love that so much. I think what really got to me is we define what we think success is, but then we do it for other people
Yep.
and not necessarily ourselves. And I think that's so common. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that piece that you wrote.
So I should say that I did not know that was an excerpt you were going to read for the first 12 minutes of this conversation that so perfectly set it up because there's a lot of alignment there and that's not ironic. I started my I had 13 side hustles before I stepped into the coaching space and finally had a successful business. And my original foray into the coaching space was in the career specialty. And very quickly I realized, and this is a great, just very tangible example for people out there to understand this definition of success. I realized that corporate America has one definition of success, and that is climb a ladder, get bigger titles, and make more money. However, there are a dozen or more different ways we individually are motivated and feel successful, whether it is wanting to grow people, whether it is wanting to expand our knowledge, go deeper technologically, do really meaningful work in a nonprofit. And I feel that because corporate America has that one definition, we have just adopted that as the only way that we also can be successful. When in reality, this goes back to that whole like peeling back the layers of the onion, removing the labels and removing the titles that make people go, wow, and knowing kind of what you value and doing work and living life in a way that's very aligned to them, because that's how you are going to feel fulfilled. And I want to clarify something that I mentioned earlier, like I don't want to have regrets, and I want to live life on my terms. But I also believe that means knowing and doing the purposeful work that does impact others. And that is what I believe you can't get to if you don't know what's important to you and what you value. And if you don't live life on your terms, society's expectations or others' expectations are keeping you from the level of satisfaction that comes from meaningful, purposeful work.
And I think that all starts with clarity, right? The clarity for what you want in your life is so important. It's just like if you don't create your own brand, someone else will create one for you, right? It's
Yep.
the same thing here. If you don't create what it is you want in your life and start to speak it out into the world and say, this is what I want to do, and here's why, other people will say, well, this is what you should do. I don't know if this happened to you, but like when I started my own business versus being in corporate, I had a lot of people say, why would you do that? You need to go back and get a corporate job. Why would you even think about that? And so I think everybody else's, I'll say, risk, averseness or their fears, they try to put on you to keep you small.
Yeah. And it isn't, in a lot of cases, many cases, at least with our inner circle and the people we love and trust, it isn't because they want to keep us small. It's because they think they know what's best for us.
Hmm.
And they have a bias, good, bad, or ugly, and it is well intentioned on their end. It is up to us to put that through the filter and decide on whether or not it kind of serves us. Now, there's the whole other aspect of like, competition is the thief of joy, and there are actually people out here who want to keep us small and quiet. But ultimately, it's one of those things where only you can make the decisions that are most important for you and your family and the life that you have decided that you want to live. What I believe is that most people do not exercise that agency enough, and most don't even realize that we have more agency and more choice if we are willing to exercise it and take what small risk could get us further.
Yeah, 100%. We've talked a little bit about labels. You've mentioned that a couple times. So here's the sentence I want to share with you that you had in your book. Labels are easy. Facing who we are without them is the hard part. And I know we talked a little bit about this, but is there anything else you would add to that about labels?
I'm actually going to tie this back to the previous longer excerpt you read because the doing, I think that is a way to fill the void so that we don't ever have to talk to the voice in our own head. If I am so busy, I do not have to spend time with myself. And since we are so stimulated and distracted now, we spend a lot less time with ourselves than we used to. However, you're never going to know what's important to you and know who you are without the labels if you don't spend that time. And that's why I think the doing, pleasing is a little bit of a danger trap to that end. And so when we talk about kind of removing the labels, what I mean there is who are you as a human being in this world when you don't work at craft and you're not a civil engineer? And that's an exploration that many don't go through and maybe even subconsciously yet intentionally keep themselves from going through by filling the calendar with so much stuff that and always having a phone in our hands, right? I talk a lot about there's a reason there are mountains on the front of my book. I talk a lot about going out and playing in the mountains and beating myself up and doing things in places where I can't be connected, because that's where I get to do hard things, push myself, and learn who I am outside of work. And while we want life and work to complement, you need to know what kind of work complements who you are without it. So you have to know who you are separate from what you do so that the pairing of the two can be intentional. And that's what I mean when I talk about it's easy to label yourself as somebody who works at craft or somebody that works in engineering. It's a lot harder to label yourself as somebody who values fun, intelligence, and authenticity.
Right. Because they haven't spent the time to even think about that. That's just
Mm-hmm.
not even on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's another one. Failure is wait, let me say that again. Failure is an instance, not an identity. That's why transitions, as messy as they are also where we start to learn, grow, and come home to ourselves.
This is so fun, by the way. I think I'm going to, and no one out there is allowed to steal this. I think my next book is going to be called Fail is a 4-letter word. Because in this society, fail is worse than the other F word, other 4-letter F word. And I think that comes back to the comparison syndrome and the social media and the level of perfection that is actually increasing in society today, that we just have this fear of doing anything that doesn't look picture perfect.
Mhm.
Ultimately, somewhere in there around that same excerpt is the phrase that failure, loosely translated, is learning experience. And I think that is fundamentally the important thing, because if you are not failing, you are not learning and growing. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. And so instead of looking at, oh my gosh, this might happen, you could look at it and go, this might happen. And
Yeah.
that's how we can come home to ourselves. Because, for instance, I talk a lot about the mountain antics. And one thread in there I talk about is like, I learned to mountain bike at age 42.8. And if you saw my elbows, you would know I learned to mountain bike at 42.8. They are forever scarred and bruised. If I had never gone through those falls, I'm not even going to call them failures, I would not have found something I intensely love as much as I do. And that's a simple example of the reason why I think we really need to put away this fear of failure and look at it as an opportunity to learn and gain insight we wouldn't get otherwise. And that can push us forward.
I learned so much from the things that other people would say were fine, but I felt like were failures. And it forced me to like really look at them and reflect on what could I have done differently to feel better about that, right? It didn't sit well with me. And then of course, situations happen that you can't predict, you can't control everything. So you just have to navigate through those situations wherever you can.
Yeah. And let's be real, half this book has fail written all over it. I'm pretty sure that's chapters 1-7.
Okay. Anybody who knows Angie will learn more about her. But also, if you don't know her, you're going to have such a sense about what she cares about, what's important to her, and what she's thinking at all times. It's almost like
Oh, yeah.
you're in her brain, right? As you're reading the book. Oh my gosh, it was so, so good. Okay, so here's next one. So here's what I want you to know. You're allowed to not have it figured out yet. You're allowed to outgrow what once fit perfectly. You're allowed to take a step forward without knowing the path you're on. You're allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to explore. I felt like that was just a huge permission slip for
Yes.
people who don't know that that's okay.
Yeah. And I got chills. Two, I almost have I never have no commentary, so let's be real. But I almost have no commentary to add to that because it speaks to itself. And it is 100% what you just said. That was me giving all of you permission for all of those things that for some reason we don't like to give ourselves permission
Mhm.
to do, right? If I start a path, I have to continue. I can't change. I won't change. I fear change. People might think poorly of me if I change. If you pick that apart and we look at why we don't do those things and why people need the permission slip, it is largely because of the expectations of others.
In the book, you talk about it going through bankruptcy, which was
Mm.
not easy. And I felt every moment of that with you. Like you really shared that story and you could feel how difficult it was. But this is the piece that you wrote after that. If you've ever found yourself in your own version of a bankruptcy attorney's office, that rock bottom moment that feels like it will define you for the rest of your life, remember this. We are more than our darkest moments. The worst decision we've ever made doesn't blacklist us from a fulfilling future. A human cannot be a failure. Mistakes do not define us. Loved that so much.
I think that is probably one of my top 3 messages in the book. And it goes back to what we were just talking about around the fear of failure. However, I think that we apply the instances of failure to ourselves and then we make them feel as if like we as a human are. My mother-in-law and my husband like to debate this topic on whether or not a human can be a failure. I'm making a generalization, people. There are some extreme cases out there of those who failed to launch. Let's just say that. But
Mm.
that was also a choice. And I think a lot of this has to do with our choices and our perspectives on things. And you can choose whether or not to look at an instance or an event as a failure that became a learning experience, or you can choose to allow it to define you, or even worse, you can allow it to allow others to define you. And when we went through bankruptcy, it was unfortunately a fairly public event due to other circumstances surrounding it that were not in this book, but teaser maybe in a future book. And so because of that, there was not only an internal level of shame that we felt in going through something that is very demoralizing. Nobody in my family's ever gone bankrupt. Like, I don't have any experience with this. And it has a stigma of being the thing that, like, poor people who can't manage money just go do. You don't just go file for bankruptcy. It costs $13,000 for us to put a business and ourselves through bankruptcy, essentially to avoid a lawsuit, is why we did it. It was the only thing that got us out of a sticky legal situation. Yet we were standing there in this like financially demoralizing room that I can still stand in and tell you stories that make it even more outlandish. But because of the community and public nature of what was going on, there was a lot of external shame applied to what was already a very, very high level of internal shame. And it's like, no one needs that. And so I could go on a soapbox about how we need to be less judgmental because everybody's going through something that we don't know. But ultimately, I think you have to come to some sort of neutral ground about others can think what they want because they don't know the whole story. We internally have to process things enough to learn from them and move on, knowing that we have a purpose to fulfill, and don't let others keep you from that, no matter what they think.
It's just going back to giving grace to someone, compassion for what they are going through. Now, most people are having their own opinions a lot, too much
Yes.
now.
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. So this part is fun. So you have four, I don't know how to describe what they are, but the four things are labels, quirks, who, not
Yeah.
what, and the pull. So
Mm.
I can read them for you if you want for each one and you can comment, or you can just talk through them, whichever is easier.
Let's go through each one. It's funny when you write a book and then you read it 12,000 times and everything is like imprinted in your memory. What's the first
Well, I had it labels, quirks, who,
label?
not
Okay.
what. Yeah.
So to me, this is back to the alignment and the identity piece, and determining the labels are like, where do you over index on labels? And so the example we use in the book, which I think is so classic, especially for our quirkiness, is that my husband Jim works in my businesses and also does his own like media and photography. But when he meets somebody, like we're in a gondola, for instance, skiing, the local people that are visiting always want to understand how the heck you're a local. And so they always ask, well, what do you do here? And instead of saying, oh, I am like a web designer and real estate photographer, he goes, I mountain bike in the summer and I ski in the winter. So he's completely changed the paradigm on the label. And what happens is a way more interesting conversation because these people are a little taken aback and they're like, wait, what? That's what you do for work? And he's like, no, that's just what I do in the outdoors, right? And Jim has a little bit of a contrarian in him, so he could get away with it. I've always had a hard time with the like alternative introduction and the like I help statements that they teach us in entrepreneurial school, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote.
Yeah.
But it's just really interesting to see what happens when you change, even if you don't remove the label, change it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're used to saying, oh, I work at Craft, maybe you change that around and you say, oh, I help teams perform better, right? That's all it takes. And so it's almost like testing it a little bit to, instead of remove a label, change a label, or maybe shift the identification of what is, because you don't need to go through rock bottom bankruptcy and the disaster of a 200-page book to get to this point. You can test some stuff out and make small changes, which will help the risk tolerance and also get a feel for like, hey, where could I re-identify?
Right. Love that. Okay. Quirks is next.
Yeah, so this is the thing that I think a lot of us like to hide, right? They're like, that's too weird. No freak flag here. We all have one, people. You all have one. And it is what makes you unique. And in this day and age where we have the ability to change careers, have alternative backgrounds, start businesses, that quirky stuff is what is going to differentiate you from other candidates and potentially from, let's say the competition from a business perspective. Now, there's a level of stuff that stays in your home and quirky that you can leverage. So for us, and this happened in real time over the last couple years, I realized I was not sharing our quirky mountain life enough with people. And
Mm,
once I did, as I mentioned at the beginning, things started to change. And I realized that even though everybody doesn't live across the street from their favorite mountain bike trail, there's something that they can relate to with this idea of having access to the things you love, or this
mhm.
idea that we get to do 365 days a year, what some people go and spend all their money on to do for 7 days a year on vacation, right? And so there was some sort of correlation there. And so don't be afraid to allow yourself to be unique, because we live in a sea of sameness now. And that unique quirkiness is ultimately what sets you apart and might tell you a starting point and where you want to go, right? And if those quirks are your interests, lean into that.
Right. Yeah. Don't hide them, lean into them. I love that. Okay. Who, not what.
Yeah, this is a really simple of who do I want to help, who don't I want to help? Right? Or who do I want in my life? Who don't I want in my life? And really making decisions on who do I want to surround myself with? What type of service do I want to be and to whom, but also who doesn't fall on that list? Because, also I think we have a hard time of taking stock of the relationships that we have and what serves us, what doesn't serve us, and what might be kind of like a detriment. And then also who we need to intentionally bring in and surround ourselves with in order to kind of build this lifestyle that we want. And so that to me is really taking inventory, not only on who do you want to help, who don't you want to help, who do I want us to be or surrounded by, who don't I want to be surrounded by.
It's like creating boundaries a little bit for
Mhm.
yourself about what it
Yeah.
is you love. Yeah. Okay. The pull.
So this is the thing that is this is awareness, in my opinion. And this is the thing where you see yourself being pulled into others' expectations. You see yourself being pulled towards a certain label that maybe you want to remove or re-identify. And so to me, this is like I operate a lot on the positive glasses half full kind of life, but sometimes you have to look at like what isn't working. So the pull is like, where am I getting sucked into a void? Where am I getting sucked into overwhelm, busy work, jamming a calendar full of stuff so I don't have to talk to myself? That is really bringing awareness to the things that are pulling you away from the purposeful, meaningful, intentional life you want to design.
And it happens before you realize it because
Yes.
sometimes someone else is pulling you along with them and then you don't realize it until you're in it. I actually don't love this. I don't love that we're doing
Yeah.
this now and I have to get myself out of it. And how do I do that without maybe breaking a relationship or, anything else, which is a little more challenging.
Mhm. And there's a tactful and very human, respectable way to go about all of this. Again, it's not necessarily just burn it down and run away, but it is really being aware and then honest with yourself on where things fall and kind of where the chips lie, and then making decisions on what may need to change, shift, what boundaries need to come into place. But the pull and the point that you make, Susan, is spot on, is that most of us don't ever take the time to have the awareness, right? This is the autopilot I talk about. We go, we go with the color coded calendar, we do all the things, and then we just don't ever stop and take stock. And that's really what the pool's about.
So, one of the things that I knew this about you, but I think it just became even more apparent as I'm reading the book, there are many trials and tribulations that you guys went through. And what I loved about it is that no matter what, you did see the positive out of it where you could. And maybe it wasn't right away, but eventually. And you trusted yourself, I'll say, that you'll figure it out, right? Even if you didn't know how to do something, even if you weren't sure where to go and how to make it happen. I think that you used the word scrappy in the book, and that's the word I thought of before I read it. And I do think that about you because what I feel is there is no fear in you in many ways. You may have some that you don't talk about, but I feel like you're very fearless. You go after what you want and you figure it out and you make it happen. Where a lot of people will sit back and say, "Oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't
Mhm.
do that." All of that stuff gets in the way. So, where do you think that really started for you?
I have thought a lot about this question, and I don't have a good answer for it, because in a way it's kind of paradoxical. Because I grew up in a baby boomer's house in very conservative, limited resource Western Pennsylvania town, where most people like were farmers or teachers, including my dad. In the book, I talk about some of the circumstances that made additional challenges for me growing up. My mom had an illness that really dictated our family dynamic in a lot of ways, financially and situationally. And so I don't know if. And so my world was small until all of a sudden I decided to make it big. And I can't decide if I was born that way. There are things that my parents talk about when I was a child that made me think that I am, or if having a limited view during childhood made me go seek something bigger, or probably the most likely is a combination of the two. My dad always talks about when I was an infant, I could not be contained. I did not want to be held to be fed. I did not want to be put in a playpen. I climbed out of it the very first time they tried to put me in it. And so I do think there is a part of me that has always had this, I'm just going to go do aspect. And then I think that there was a level of resilience that is both innate and was nurtured due to some of the things I had to kind of do for myself and work through as a kid with my mom and her illness that just like exacerbated all of it in kind of like the best way.
Well, I mean, it's serving you well for sure.
Thanks. I like to
No,
think so. Got me in some hot water a few times,
well, yeah, but
but
you got yourself out.
I'll kind of I'll put a stamp on that by saying I also think all of that comes with a certain attitude that you have to have in order to say, "Hey, I'm just going to try it." And it was modeled to me as a child, and I also believe my genes say, "What good does it do to be negative in a negative situation?" Right? My mom with all of her health challenges has always been very grateful that she's here and hasn't acted like the victim of it, and I saw that modeled. And so even in the worst of times, I always remember thinking like it doesn't do me any good to just be more miserable in this situation. I'm going to be realistic about it, not toxically positive, and work through it. And so I think it's just it's a combination of nurture and nature.
Was there anything else I didn't ask you about the book specifically that you want to share?
That's a loaded question. I don't know. It's so interesting. This is more anecdotal than an answer to your question. It's so interesting that, I've been in this like coaching author speaker world for close to 10 years and finally added the author title label to everything. And a lot of people who are in this world do that first. And so it's been really interesting to start changing my own identity in a community of people that know me as one thing but now have the context of the thing they know. And so I just think that in a way I'm like reliving my own book again, but in a much less rocky rocky form.
See that though, because I also added author after, and I feel like now I actually introduce myself most times as an author first.
Mhm.
And I think there is something to that, especially after I've written two now, it's just much more prolific. But I think it's very common for people to see themselves differently after writing a book. There's just something
Yeah.
about it that just really changes you. It changes everybody else who sees you as
Yeah.
well. And I think that's part of it too. But yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
I love it for you.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to go into the questions that I normally ask everyone, but we're going to change them up a little bit for Angie since she's been on the show before. So I did prep her a little bit, but she hasn't had a lot of prep. So let's see what she comes out with here. How has your visibility changed since we were last on the podcast together?
Well, I think we just recorded the entire answer to that question, but I think it is I've taken my own advice and I'm not like I never played small, but that I think your definition of small changes over time, and so I would say that my visibility has definitely gone to a next level of like impact with the book. And I've also been out and speaking and on stages more, which I insanely love. And for me, I love the opportunity to impact at scale. And so that level of visibility has been really fun to level up into.
Yes, I've definitely seen all of that. Are there any new things that you maybe have coming up or that you're currently thinking about to be visible?
Mm. Well, once you write one book, it's like I think it becomes an addiction, and now I have like 7 more in my head. So get ready. The Modern Coach Press will not be a book of one, but in addition to the book being the very new thing, I feel like I'm into at this moment. The getting out and the visibility is really where I'm focused. So anywhere I can go and stand on a stage and opine about all the things that I know, love, and think I will take because that's really what I hope to have coming down the pipeline.
Yeah. As I learned, you have a responsibility when you write a good book to talk about it and share it with others. And that means being visible. So,
Yes.
okay. So, normally I ask about career or leadership advice, but I'm going to grab a couple of things that she wrote and I just love to have her give her opinions or thoughts about them. So, all of this reminded me that leadership isn't about what we do, it's about who we are, how we impact and inspire, how we meet the demands of leadership in today's world. The real measure of leadership isn't how brightly we shine, it's how much light we create for those around us. That's
Mhm.
what leadership really is, which I thought
Yes.
was perfect for a visibility podcast for
It
sure.
is. It is, and I'm gonna respond to that by actually going a little earlier in that chapter to tie in the fact that I think that the definition and what leadership is has gotten skewed by corporate America, who has very much associated or conflated leadership and management, and they are not the same thing. And so, because of that, leadership has become synonymous with what do I do? How many people are under me? What's my title? Instead of a way of being. And the reason I think that is important is because the societal assumptions around leadership suggest you have to be a certain type of personality to be a leader, or you have to have a certain type of visibility to be a leader. But I don't believe that to be true because there are plenty of amazing introverted leaders out there, and I also believe that you could be leading two people. You could be leading yourself and you are a leader in some regard, as long as you know the strengths with which you carry forward. And so to me, leadership is very much more an authentic way of showing up than it is this a title or a list of responsibilities.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that at all. I think there's just been an opportunity for helping people become stronger leaders too.
Mhm.
I feel like I was very lucky that that was a huge focus at Craft for us to become stronger leaders, and that was the goal. And I just don't think that that is the goal for everyone as much anymore. It's much more about what are you doing? Are you getting everything done versus are you actually leading us in the
Yeah.
future, to somewhere bigger and better, right? Whatever
Yeah.
that looks like.
Exactly.
Totally agree. Okay. Any books that you might recommend to the audience?
Ooh, I've been leafing through lots of books lately in deciding, different layout aspects of my own. I have a few trusted standbys. One that has come to mind recently is The Coaching Habit by Michael
Mhm.
Bungay Stainer, which is
Mhm.
not a coaching book. It's a leadership book. And so
Yeah.
I feel like that is very applicable here. But one of the reasons it comes to mind is because I will speak it out loud to the universe that one of my goals is to be in an airport bookstore. I love airport
Mm.
bookstores, and that is where I picked up that book. And I read it on the plane on the way home, and it changed. Even though it's not a coaching book, it did change my perspective on coaching. And so I think that no matter where you are in coaching or your leadership journey and how many people that you lead, or whether it's yourself, it will have you approach conversations differently.
Well, if anybody wants to learn more about you, your business, your book, now that it's going to be out in the world for
Yes.
everyone to find, where can they find you?
The best place to go is scarygoodread.com, which when you name your book Scary Good, you get really convenient marketing and URLs. So scarygoodread.com will kind of point you to all things book. And then if you want to find out and get more in touch with me in the coaching world, you can find me at themoderncoach.co.
Love it. Well, thank you for being here. I love your energy as always.
Thank you so
And Angie and
much.
I have been together in person and
Yes.
been together on our podcast. And I love how you take the reins and just go and try stuff and you're not scared to do that. And I think if more people tried that, amazing things would come out of a lot more people, right? But
Yeah.
so many people are holding themselves back. So let Angie be your model.
I would say, and I hope to inspire you to do so. And Sue, thank you so much for
Yeah,
being willing to read the book. And this was a really fun conversation as I get to like dig into more chats about what's on these pages. So thank you.
you're so welcome. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.